The Gloriana set by ThebeMoon. Read by Ella Max Mabella. Chapter 35. Halloween, Part 1. Dawn found Hermione at her desk, working on her loop. She stood to push heavy red curtains aside to let in the golden light, her gaze falling on the framed picture of herself and Ron waltzing at Bill and Fla's wedding. Or trying to waltz. Ron was pumping her arm up and down, and Hermione stumbled twice just in the photo's brief loop of movement. But Ron's wide smile. It was perfect like that, she thought, sitting down again. That was us. Her thoughts turned to the sweep and euphoria of another waltz, with a different partner, also perfect. Also us. Hermione opened a drawer and extracted a newspaper clipping of a couple kissing over a sparkling dinner table, diamonds in her dark hair. Quite perfect. But was it really us? Hermione replaced the clipping in the drawer and resumed scribbling. She was working up a whole new life plan centered around 4 ranked priorities. 1. Newts. 2. The blood potion. 3. Regular schoolwork. And 4. Learning to fly properly. The plan carefully did not include Draco Malfoy, except for his role in number 2. Theo was incorporated into number 3, since work-life balance was vital to any sustainable organizational plan. A half-formed plan for Astoria was also part of number 3, listed under hobbies. Satisfied, she closed the notebook on the last page, a 10-part agenda for her first flying lesson. Then she tucked the notebook into the drawer with the clipping and left to desk to begin her day. Theo was waiting when she stepped through the portrait hall. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I heard you had dinner in the infirmary." "Yes and yes," Hermione said. Ginny had frog-marched her straight to the infirmary, where Hermione had to listen to all her arguments against Quidditch. Madame Pomfrey was passionate about the dangers of reckless joyriding on brooms.
"You should be studying for your newts, Miss Granger,"
the matron said. Now Theo was looking her up and down, frowning. "They are saying you lost control of your broom?" "Yes," Hermione said again. Only Ginny and Malfoy knew Astoria hexed her broom, and Hermione wanted to keep it that way. Astoria was a menace in the air. She must be stopped, and now Ginny could be a target as well. "I understand that Draco saved you," Theo continued. Hermione nodded. "Yes, he was nearby." "He usually is." Hermione blinked at the edge to Theo's voice. Then his face softened slightly, and he wound a hand in her loose hair. "I'm just glad you're all right." "I'm fine," she said. Theo's hand in her hair gently pulled her head back, and then his lips were on hers, deepening the kiss, needing reassurance. The creak of the portrait hole opening broke them apart, and Parvati gave them an impish smile as she walked by. Hermione mulled over Theo's words as they walked to breakfast. Obviously, Astoria had lost no time spreading her version of the incident, so it was important that Hermione appear calm and collected. "Dean, I was holding on with both hands," he was screeching 5 minutes later. She and Theo had arrived to find the Gryffindor table locked in a passionate debate over her fall. The Lundy twins were listing Hermione's likely blunders, including improper altitude, excessive speed, and failure to account for wind direction. Chaser Demelsa Robbins scolded Hermione for not brushing the broom's straw before flying. "An untidy broom is an unbalanced broom," Demelsa said, and the whole table nodded in agreement.
"Her hand position have always been terrible too," Seamus put in. "I'm surprised this hasn't happened before."
Hermione viciously tore apart her scone. Splendid! The entire school now thought she'd almost died through sheer incompetence, only to be saved by Malfoy. She didn't know what was worth, the pitying glances from the other Gryffindors or Malfoy's face as eager Slytherins asked him if he was still the Seeker. She appreciated his discretion about Astoria, but he didn't have to look so smug. "Well, that's up to our lovely captain, isn't it?" she heard Malfoy say cheerily. "Let me know when you find out." "Great," Hermione grumbled into her toast. "I'm the idiot and he's the hero." "Well, Malfoy did save you, right?" Neville asked her. Hermione and Theo gave him an irritated look. "Right?"
"Yes, he did,"
answered Ginny, slipping onto the bench beside Theo.
Hermione could have been seriously injured or even killed, and if he wants to lord it over everyone for a while, that's fine with me."
She looked sternly at Hermione.
"I hope you thanked Malfoy."
Hermione couldn't remember if she'd actually thanked him. I told him a story.
"You'll need to thank him,"
Ginny said, stuffing a muffin into her mouth Ron style.
"Yes,"
said Theo, taking the high road. He slid an arm around her shoulders.
"I, for one, am very grateful."
"Thank you for saving me yesterday," Hermione said to Malfoy in a surly tone before Patience began. Malfoy eyed her over their cauldron. "You told me the Thestral story. Apparently that's not good enough for some people. Yes, well, I hope you've considered what I said about flying lessons." "I did," she answered, setting her Patience book out. "Ginny's too busy, so I outrun. He's begging to teach me for years." "That wasn't exactly," Malfoy began, but just then Lavender arrived and took her old seat beside him.
"Hello, Draco,"
Lavender breathed, eyes wide. She wore her dark blonde hair in a mess of curls today, piled up on the top of her head and fastened with purple metal pins. "Hello, Brown," Malfoy said smoothly, lightening their cauldron with his wand.
"You were so brave yesterday, Draco,"
Lavender said.
"Everyone's talking about it."
She looked coldly across the table.
"You should be more grateful, Hermione."
"She really should," Malfoy agreed in velvet tones. "I can think of many ways Hermione could show her gratitude." Patience went downhill from there to Hermione's way of thinking. Lavender spoke at length about if she was safe from certain death, she would certainly be grateful instead of scowling all the time. Malfoy nodded sagely and scribbled runes on a piece of parchment, leaving Hermione to brew the day's potion, a solution for magical aquariums, all alone. The task was complicated by Lavender's hairstyle, which began to fall apart under the steam and shed hairpins. Every time a pin fell into the cauldron, Hermione had to vanish the contents, since the potion had to be absolutely metal-free for use in magical aquariums. She was finally able to finish the potion and pour it into a bottle while Lavender was in the supply cupboard. Malfoy also took advantage of their partner's absence, handing Hermione a list of suggestions for demonstrating proper gratitude. "Malfoy!" Hermione choked as she read the rune-filled parchment. "Do take note of number 6. I found our conversation in the woods quite enlightening." Hermione's face was fiery red now. "Malfoy, you're the most appalling—"
"Mean?"
rapped out Lavender, who had returned with a jar of pickled toad they didn't need.
"You are so mean to him, Hermione."
"She truly is," Malfoy said sadly. Slughorn's brass bell rang, and Hermione flounced off, discreetly tucking the list into her bag so Malfoy wouldn't notice. But judging from the low chuckle behind her, he definitely had. Afternoon classes were cancelled in honor of Halloween, and most of the students rushed outside, eager to begin their weekend. Hermione spent the time studying in the Gryffindor common room. She was not hiding, no matter what Ginny said before heading to the Spangled Vale with Blaise. Hermione skipped the feast and curled up on the sofa with Crookshanks, reading the Elder Fugbark's book and eating the entire bag of sugar-free Halloween candy her parents sent. She was relaxing, not hiding. At 7 o'clock, he headed down to the festival and regretted it immediately. Hermione had approached Ernie at lunch, offering to help. There was still time to set up a proper volunteer sheet, for example, and she had some last-minute ideas to promote inter-house unity, but Ernie wouldn't listen. Theo's antics had offended the Hufflepuff's pride, and he was convinced Hermione had been in on the joke. Where people got the idea Hufflepuffs were humble, Hermione had no idea. Obviously, they'd never spent time with Ernie or Justin Finch-Fletchley, not to mention the squeaky mice. Nothing Hermione could say would change the head boy's mind, and Ernie had stalked off in high dudgeon, muttering that all Slytherins should be in Azkaban. The end result was a school event that failed on nearly every possible level. Its theme, the Forbidden Forest, would likely scare the first years and traumatize every war veteran in the castle. The forest was Voldemort's headquarters during the Battle of Hogwarts, and Harry had confronted Voldemort there, ready to die. Hermione was surprised that McGonagall had allowed it. All the Hufflepuffs dressed up, and many of the Gryffindors, but few Ravenclaws participated, and not one Slytherin wore a costume. Some students dressed up as spiders or unicorns or centaurs, deeply offending Firenzo, who left early and spent evenings sulking in his classroom. Nobody could sulk like a centaur. Hermione came as one of the forest's black flowers, wearing tight green robes and a large black petal on her head like a sun hat. Neville created a Winkweed costume with Luna's help and went around asking people to try to intimidate him. He'd apparently planted a few Winkweed cuttings in the forest, although he considered them unlikely to flourish. Hermione disagreed. From what she had seen of the wild plants, the Winkweeds would likely love the Forbidden Forest and would spread to terrorize unwary Hogwarts students for generations to come. Ernie's planned activities failed as well, mostly because the squeaky mice, all dressed as black forest mice, sabotaged every one of them. They put spiders in the cauldrons for apple bopping and added so many dead ends to the hedge maze that nobody could get out. They talked the little Slytherin girl into wearing mouse ears too, and then they all charmed the pumpkins to scream in pain when anyone tried to carve them. Hermione saw no sign of Theo as she wove through the crowd. The lighting was lovely, she had to admit. Floating lights stirred with tulle gave off a ghostly glow in the dark sky. Standing torches burned beside every table, and lanterns strung on silver ropes lit up the dance floor. Poor Ernie was manning the raffle table, where the grand prize, courtesy of Professor Sprout, the Hufflepuff head of house, was the complete collection of Herbs of Desire, Loving the Plant Life Around You, volumes 1 to 14. Hermione sighed. Another opportunity lost, since she could have arranged for Weasley's Wizarding Wheezes merchandise. She stopped by the refreshment table and loaded a tray with cauldron cakes and a flagon of punch. "How are sales?" she asked, placing the tray in front of Ernie.
"Dismal,"
the head boy said, too depressed or perhaps too hungry to snub her. The table's glass bowl held only a few folded half tickets. "Careful," she said. "The punch is spiked."
"Thank Merlin,"
Ernie said, pouring a glass and downing it. "I'm really sorry about Theo, Ernie," Hermione said, scribbling her name on a ticket and handing him 2 sickles. "These Slytherins are driving me crazy too." She stood by the table's extra chair, and Ernie nodded for her to join him. Then they munched silently for a time, looking out over the crowd.
"Bit of a shit festival, isn't it?"
Ernie finally said. "The music is nice," Hermione said. Slughorn had lent his floating orchestra for the occasion. Neville was dancing with Parvati, who tried to avoid his writhing vines. Theo was still nowhere in sight, but there was Malfoy checking with Pansy by the dance floor, dressed in his usual black.
"I've decided to take your suggestion from earlier this term," Ernie said, "about hosting a prefect brainstorming retreat. I'm thinking a 3-hour session tomorrow with dinner brought in."
"That's marvellous," Hermione said. "Failing to plan is planning to fail." Ernie looked hopefully at her.
"I know you said you wouldn't do student government this year, but—"
"I'd be glad to attend," she said. "I'll even write up some possible activities." Ernie gave a relieved sigh. "Why don't you go have fun, Ernie?" she went on. "I'll stay here for a while and sell tickets."
"Really?"
Ernie sounded pathetically grateful.
"You don't have to, really. It's all right. I know you didn't."
Hermione smiled. "I want to. Go ahead."
"Well, thank you, Hermione,"
Ernie said, regaining a bit of his old pompous manner. He stood and shook her hand. Hermione bit her lip to keep from smiling.
"Be sure to fold the ticket stubs before putting them in the bowl. That's a good girl."
Hermione rolled her eyes as the Hufflepuff strode off, but it felt good to see him happily bossing the prefects as they tried to de-spider the apple-bopping cauldrons. "Well, don't you look lovely in green?" purred a voice beside her. She knew that voice. He was probably here to deliver another shocking list. The list from potions was now in her trunk, bordered along with the Gloriana set. It wouldn't do for Ginny to find it and possibly add to it. Her cheeks heated at the very idea. "Hello, Malfoy," Hermione said. To be continued. Next up, Hermione says something nice to Draco. Thank you for listening to today's chapter of The Gloriana Set by ThebeMoon, read by LMX Mabella. If you would like to stay up to date on upcoming stories and chapters, You can follow me on YouTube, AO3 or Spotify.